Hello, and welcome to the ScandiPWA version 3 plugin system overview. In this video, you're going to learn about this plugin system, how can it be utilized, and what can be achieved with it. Without further ado, let's get into it. First of all, let's see what I have prepared. So here I have a source folder that is the parent theme of my PWA theme that you are seeing here. And I have an example extension that I'm working on with you right now. Let's find out what in the code of the actual application makes the ScandiPWA system work as it works. There are two things you should absolutely know about. First of all, these are namespace comments. Let's open the app component and see that we have a class here and we have a namespace magic comment right above it. This comment says that this class has this component /app/ component namespace. If this namespace is changed in this magic comment, then the namespace of the class in the actual application is changed. These namespaces are not just informative or decorative, they provide the actual functionality of the ScandiPWA plugin system. That's very important to remember. Please do not change these namespaces in your application until you do this on purpose. And the second thing, in the source code, in the theme, not around the theme, that's necessary for the plugins to work, is this extensions block in the ScandiPWA JSON file. Basically, all the information that's stored here has the following format. Each entry has a name. For example, this example entry has a name of example. This is an extension I am going to work on today with you. This can be anything pretty much. This is just informative, just for me to remember what functionality do I store in this directory. And this path, the value of this entry, is the path from the Magento root to my extensions root folder. Basically, my module, this one, is stored in app/code under the vendor ScandiPWA, and it has a name of example extension. It's important to point out that without the vendor here, the ScandiPWA plugin system may malfunction. Please do not do like this. Do not store your extensions directly in the app/code directory. Always have a vendor written down in there. And this is all I need to connect my functionality of a custom extension to the application, to a theme that I store in here separately. Let's look at the extension we're going to work with today. Basically, this is a regular Magento 2 module. You see some familiar to you files, for example, registration PHP or directories like etc, module, resolver. We have some PHP code here that our extension may need, but this specific one will not, because I will not implement any backend functionality right now. But I see no reason in showing that explicitly here, because the process of implementing backend functionality is just the same as with every other Magento 2 module. You just do the same thing. The only not resemblant to the original Magento 2 modules folder structure that we see here is src folder. It contains a ScandiPWA folder, which contains app and sw directories. These two directories represent two contexts that you may write plugins for. If you need to modify something in the service worker, the functions that build service worker usually also have namespaces. You write that in the sw directory. If you want to make modifications to some component, logic, store, etc., everything that's not related to service worker, everything in the application on the front end, you go to the app directory. Here you see the same folder structure as you see in the source/src/app. You see component, query, route, store. The directories here have exactly the same meaning as here, only that they are used by the plugin, not by the actual application, and the plugin is used by the actual application. The only directory you will probably not see in the themes and you are seeing here right now is the plugin directory. And we are going to take a close look on what happens in that new directory. Let's dive in. Here I see a regular plugins template. It modifies some namespaces and some members of these namespaces. Let's start with implementing some simple modification. Imagine that I want to modify the card query. Let's see what I have inside of the card query right now. I have an example store here that operates with this code here. Let's open the card query. Let's open. As you see, here we have a lot of fields, but none of these fields are base fields. We have no base grand total, we have no base currency. What if our plugin net these fields? What should we do? This is very easy. Let's take a look. In order to add these fields directly to the card query, let's open that. I would need just to write them down in this getCardTotals fields member function. If I add them here, they are requested from backend together with all of the other fields you see below. But I am not going to modify the source code of the application in any way possible. I am going to do that with plugin. I will say to the ScandiPWA plugin system that I want to modify this card query namespace that I can find above the class declaration. I'm going to modify a member function of this class, and the member function I am going to modify is this underscore getCardTotals fields. And this function, I am going to replace it with my add base fields that you can see here above everything else. My custom add base fields function has the following arguments. The first one is args. Args stands for arguments. These are the arguments that this original function accepts. Currently, args will be an array that consists of 0 elements because, as you can see in the source code, the getCardTotals fields member function does not require any arguments. Then we have a callback. A callback in this specific case is this initial getCardTotals fields function. But you should remember that ScandiPWA plugin system works such way that it supports multiple plugins declared for the same parts of functionality of the original functionality of the application. Hence, there may be several plugins, just as my add base fields, that modify this getCardTotals fields member function. For example, the second plugin that is going to wrap around the getCardTotals fields is going to wrap actually around my plugin, and the callback in that function will call my addBase fields function. That is going to call the callback, which is the original getBaseTotals fields class member. And we have an instance here. This is an instance of the card query class when it's instantiated. Basically, what we access through this keyword inside of the class is the instance argument of this addBase fields function. So, very easy. What I want to do is I want to return an array, because this value here is an array. I want not mess with the types of it. I will return an array that consists of all the original stuff that's declared in this getCardTotals fields function. All these fields are returned when I call the callback on the arguments, and I'm just going to spread this into a new array. And of course, I'm going to add these two fields, the base grant total and base currency code fields that I have been talked about for the last few minutes. And let's take a look at the card query. Now you see that the base currency code and the base grant total fields are requested from the backend together with all of the other fields that are declared in the get card totals fields. And this logic is declared outside of the application. That's very magical. Let's proceed. The member functions are not the only thing that we are able to modify inside of the application by using the ScandiPWA version 3 plugin system. The second thing I'm going to show you how to interact with is member properties. Let's open this checkout payments component. This checkout payments component has a member that's called payment render map. This is a very important part of any ScandiPWA application because this payment render map says the application how to react on different payment methods, what to render below the payment method selection screen. For example, for Stripe, in the Stripe extension, it is going to be a Stripe card form. In the PayPal extension, is going to be PayPal Pay Now button. And now I'm going to show you how to add a custom value right into this payment render map. So, the process is very similar to how we modified the card query member function. We're going to say to the plugin system that we're going to modify this namespace's member property. And the name of this member property is payment render map. This add new payment function is a function which is going to be called instead of direct access to this payment render map member property. And the return value of this function will be the value of the payment render map inside of the application. So if I return 123 here, that's the same as writing payment render map equals to 123 here. If I return the prop itself, I return just the payment render map. And if I return null, that's the same thing. No, actually, if I return undefined, that's the same thing as deleting this from the application at all. But now we are going to modify it, not delete. What I want to do is I want to return an object that consists of everything in the original prop and some new value, which is going to be anything. For example, 123. I will remind you that the instance here is the same as the instance here, and if I want to access anything from this original component, I am going to access the property through the instance. For example, if I want to call this render not supported member, I am going to write here instance dot render not supported dot bind instance, so that when the new value is selected, new value payment method is selected, it will render that it is not supported in the application. Let's see what we have achieved with our modifications. Let's go to the cart page. Oh, and I'm going to show you that I am logging the payment render map here in the render method of this checkout payments component, so we can see whether our modification actually worked. Let's open it. Here we can see that we have this new value inside of our payment render map. Isn't that beautiful? Let's proceed. The next thing I'm going to show you now are function plugins. Basically, in the ScandiPWA, you can not only plug into any member of any class, but also to functions which are not members of any class. Let's talk a little bit about them. In ScandiPWA, you have an opportunity to plug not only into some class members and some classes, but also into some functions that are not members of any class. Let's take a look at this process right now. So we have this template, and we're going to modify the price utility that's called format price. Let's open that. Util price right here. This is a function that is responsible for the correct display of the price in the product page, in the product list page, etc, etc, etc. Let's break it. Let's say that we're going to modify this util/price/format price namespace of this function here, and we're going to replace the original function with this funny price wrapper that I'm going to implement right now. You can notice that the functions plugins object structure is a bit different from the member functions and from member properties, because functions themselves are the only members of their namespaces in this situation. That's why we don't need to reference them by name explicitly once again. So we're just saying that we're wrapping around the function and we're providing a wrapper immediately. So the arguments here are the same as in the member function plugin type. Arguments are the arguments that are passed here. Basically, I'll have a price and I have the currency. Callback is this original function or the next plugin, and the context is the context that this function is bound or applied to. Instead of this smart logic here, let's just return ha 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 and see what happens in the application. I expect the application to render ha 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 string instead of every price everywhere in the application. That's a great story, isn't it? Let's proceed. Let's disable that for now. Now we are familiar with member properties, member functions modifications, regular functions modifications. That's a pretty big amount of new information already, but it's all very, very similar. So let's proceed to the static members. You will find nothing new here in this point, but you will find in the next one, when I will talk about modifying classes directly. Here, this is just about some details of how the static properties, static members can be plugged into. Let's take a look. First of all, we have the expandable content component. Let's open it here. And it has a static member of default props. Now it says that all the expandable contents in the application are not expanded by default. Expandable contents are working only on the mobile devices. Let's take a look here. For example, this is an expandable content, and this is an expandable content as well. Let's see what can we do. We can modify this default props static property in order to make all the expandable contents open by default. Let's do that. In order to do that, I'm going to tell the ScandiPWA version 3 plugin system to extend this to plug into this component, expandable content component namespace that I'm going to find right here above this class's declaration. I'm going to say to the plugin system that I want to modify a static member of this class. And the static member's name I'm going to plug into is default props. Let's take a look here. Here we have exactly the same API as for member properties. So here what I want to do is I want to return an object that consists of every single property inside of the original one, and I am going to override one of them as content expanded and set it to true. Let's see what happens with the application. Now I expect every expandable content to be expanded by default, and to collapse it I need to click it. If I disable this plugin, and wait for my application to compile, I'm going to see that all the expandable contents are not expanded by default. Cool, isn't it? Now let's take a look at modifying static member functions. We have just modified a static property and we used a static member handler type for that. For static stuff, we use the same handler both for properties and for functions. Remember that this is only about static. If you use member property handler type for member function, you will get absolutely not what you expect. But for the static stuff, it works. Actually, this is the only handler type that you can use with the static stuff. It's static member. As you see here, the arguments here are absolutely the same instead of the instance being target class, because that's what passed to the static function plugins. And here instance also is of course the target class, not the instance of the target class. Basically, I want to modify the util/css, and I want to, for example, log something every time an application calls the set variable function. I just tell the plugin system that I'm plugging into the util/css class, the util/css namespace that I see right above that class. I modify a static member of that class, and the name of the static member I'm going to modify is set variable. And I'm replacing this set variable with my static function plugin, which has access to that set variable through its callback, has access to the arguments of that set variable, ref name and value. Array of 3 elements is what we're gonna see in the args variable, and the target class is this one CSS class. So here, in order to achieve what I want to do, I want to console log 123 here, and then I'm going to return the callback called on the arguments. Let's see how many times that variable is called throughout the application. Yes, 123, 123, 123, 123. Yes, this is correct. Let's comment that out for a while. And now let's get to the last interesting part, actually the last at all part of our little tutorial. It is going to be about class plugins. Here you're going to see some magic indeed. Let's open the app component. Let's split the screen so we see it properly. The app component has a namespace, that's this one. And I can say to the plugin system, I want to plug into this namespace and I want to modify the class itself. Instead of it, I want this function to be passed. This function accepts the original class here as this only argument here. We expect people to use this API as follows. It takes a class and it returns a class. That is important, that it returns a class. If you do something like this, it will not work. It returns a class that extends the original class. And here we can overwrite anything we want inside of this original class. For example, I'm going to override the render method and I'm going to return a number from it. Let's see whether this works, or should I return an HTML element? No, I see that it works just as I expected. Let's check through the Components React Developer Tools tab. We see that the only React component in the application right now is our extended app class, and it does not render anything underneath it because we blocked that with our custom logic. These APIs are the only tools that the ScandiPWA plugin system provides to you. This is how you're supposed to connect your custom logic to the ScandiPWA application. To search for some more examples of the working extensions, working plugins, you can browse our marketplace, of course, marketplace.scandipwa.com. We have a lot of extensions that are absolutely free of charge, and you can learn from an example. Thank you for your attention. I hope this guide has been informative. Goodbye and good luck.